because there is a privilege there that attaches. However, there are some exceptions. So joining me now to discuss it is criminal defense attorney Kira Lynn Abernathy and trial attorney Christa Ramey. Thank you both for joining me this afternoon. And I want to get a little bit into this idea of the spousal privilege. We are going to hear from Chad tomorrow, and he's going to be limitations on his testimony. So I want to get into what those limitations are and how to overcome that. Let me start with you, Kira. This idea of spousal privilege, what are some of the limitations that he has to watch out for in his testimony?
So I know it's different from state to state. I'm not as up to date on the Ohio, not practicing there. But I do know it's kind of interesting because he's already, like you stated earlier, he's already pled guilty to the murder. So the spousal privilege would be if he said something that implicated him in any way that could possibly bring additional charges. That is really where we see that coming in. If there's anything that is covered by that, you want to be careful. But I'm not really sure how that would play into effect here. And I think I understand his confusion and what we just heard, asking the court, say, hey, you guys want me to say this, but you're telling me that I have a right not to say this, but you want me to say this, or at least, the prosecutors want him to. Obviously, he would be what I would think more of their witness than anyone else. So I'm kind of with Mr. Cobb on this one.
Yeah,
not quite sure.
It's actually a twofold issue, and you're exactly right. There's one part of this that he's got to be careful not to say anything that may bring further charges. But Chris, there's this other idea that he's going to be limited in what he can actually say about what Erica Stefanko did, correct?
Correct. So the difference here, the distinction here is when you're talking about what he might say that it would incriminate himself, that's his own privilege. That's his Fifth Amendment right to not incriminate himself. On the other side, with the spousal privilege, the concern is when a married couple shares confidences with one another, they expect it to be private. And not only is he a holder of that privilege, but so is Ms. Stefanko. And so in this case, he cannot reveal that privilege because it actually violates her Fifth Amendment rights in some respects, if that makes sense.
No, it does. But there's also this exception that if there is, in fact, a third party involved in that conversation, then that expectation of privacy doesn't attach and that he can testify. But my question is, do children qualify? Because clearly we're suggesting that there were 4 children in the car when all this was going on.
That's more specific to Ohio law. I would think it would still apply, or the spousal privilege would still attach when you're talking about what is happening in the confines of your marriage. Your children are there. You would expect. I would expect when my conversations with my own spouse to be private, even if my children are present. And this can vary from state to state. So. As I'm here in California, and that's my understanding here. A 6-year-old or 7-year-old child wouldn't waive that privilege.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair representation of what the law is in Ohio as well, which is why he's being admonished to be very careful about what he actually testifies as far as what Erica Stefanko did. So that's going to be a hurdle that the prosecution's going to have to get over. I want to bring in an interview that we had done with, again, we showed her a little earlier in the show, a friend of Ashley Biggs, the victim in this case. Her name is Courtney Boswell, and she talks about what she viewed as their relationship. This is Ashley Biggs and Chad Cobb. Then I want to talk a little bit about the effect of domestic violence on relationships and the possibility of that dynamic in the relationship between Erica and Chad. Right now, Courtney is going to be talking about the relationship between Chad and Ashley Biggs, the victim in this case. Let's give a listen.
Chad was just that person who would put tracking devices on her car and stalk her and everything. So you just knew it was just a matter of time. And so when you finally found out that it had happened, you were just like, part of you just knew it was coming. And then you just were still numb. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to acknowledge the fact that it had happened because I just figured it was a bad dream. Maybe it was a different Ashley Biggs. But it was just heartbreaking. I mean, my stomach dropped. It was, I mean, I couldn't think that it would even be possible for anybody to even hurt Ashley because of how sweet and kind she was. So it took a real monster to take her out. And you just were angry at the same time. You were angry because you knew who it was. You knew it was coming, unfortunately, or something bad was going to happen to her. Not necessarily that she would end up murdered, but you knew something. It was just a matter of time before something happened.
All right, still with me is Carolyn Abernathy and Christa Ramey, both trial attorneys, criminal defense attorneys. We heard her description of the relationship between Chad Cobb, who was the murderer of Ashley Biggs, but also the father of her child, and this relationship. Now, Kira, I know you have some experience working in this realm of domestic violence, and I think it's clear here, at least from opening statements, that part of the defense's case is going to be that Erica Stefanko was under the control of Chad Cobb. He's very controlling and led her down this path. Do you think that can be successful? Do you think that that is the type of thing that we'll see in these types of relationships, that they can be so controlling as to make someone take part in this kind of action?
I mean, I think it's a good defense. They will really have some high hurdles to overcome, especially that 3-hour recorded phone call with allegedly that the prosecutor has with Chad Cobb's mom and Miss Stefanko. So, but I think, yes, I mean, you see this all the time. People feel like they don't have a way out, especially if there's children involved. I mean, we heard that there's 4 children running around. Maybe he threatened the kids. Maybe, obviously it's a huge thing for a defendant themselves to take the stand, but maybe something like that happened and it will come out that he was controlling. He was saying, no, you better do this. I'll kill you if you don't, all these other things. If he was like that with Ashley Biggs, why would he necessarily change with the anyone else that he was with, is going to be what the defense is going to want to show. And I think that could help. But at the same time, why didn't she say anything? Why didn't she go forward? Was she really that scared? They will have to prove and convince the jury, no, it was really that terrifying. He was that controlling that she didn't think she had anywhere else to go.
Yeah, now, Christa, the defense seemed to be very clear in the direction they're going. They're going to paint him as the boogeyman, the bad guy, the one that they want the jury to put the blame on, because certainly blame has to be had and put somewhere. As a defense attorney, that's part of what you're trying to do here. But when you start thinking about the difficulty in doing that, again, you have that phone call that she had with the mother. That's a problem. But also then you have Dunson testifying that she threatened them as well. It seems like it's a bit of a Hail Mary for this defense. But where else can they go?
Well, I think it's their best defense, but I think that it's one that cannot be pulled off without her taking the stand. And I say that because she's going to have to talk about what kind of trauma she had in that relationship in order for it to be convincing. If it was in fact true, if she was in fact terrorized herself and forced to, make that phone call to have the pizza delivered and to then go and help him clean up his mess, I would think she would have to explain what she was going through. I would also believe that they would have to call an expert, a psychological expert of some sort, in order to sell it, because otherwise it just sounds like you're throwing everything against the wall. And we already know that Mr. Cobb is a monster.
Yeah, it's funny, Christa, that you bring up this examination, this mental examination. Part of this case early on, it seemed that Erica Stefanko might at least